here we are. If someone genuinely believes that Darksiders 3 एक 4 out of 10 game है, same rating as launch period Fallout 76, then it's a problem. See, it makes sense to me कि क्यों ये game इतना divisive है, especially among the fans of the series, because Darksiders 3 is simply a very different kind of game compared to its predecessors. While having differences between their gameplay and structure, Darksiders and Darksiders II still Zelda-inspired hack and slash consider किए जा सकते हैं because they have a lot of things in common. Darksiders 3 on the other hand उस game design philosophy को completely discard करता है to follow a new and trendy game design template which is Souls-like. Add a buggy and broken launch for both PC and consoles, and it makes sense why the majority of the people hated this game. But after more than half a decade, and in retrospect, Darksiders X series had that changes its gameplay style between each release, and I played these games with that perspective. Because of that, Darksiders 3 मेरे लिए एक fresh and new take था on the series gameplay, and not the abandonment of what Darksiders is. Because just like how Resident Evil is survival horror, action horror, third-person shooter, and even light gun shooter, Darksiders is a Zelda clone, an ARPG, a Souls-like, and a twin-stick shooter. It's a series that changes and evolves with each release, and I can understand why some people would not like that, but I think the series deserves some respect for it. And even if it's trend chasing, I think they're implementing these mechanics well enough to create some great games, and Darksiders 3 is no exception. Taking place during War's 100-year imprisonment, Darksiders 3 is another prequel sequel to Darksiders, जिसमें players control करते हैं Fury को, the immature and hot-headed horseman who loves the heat of battle more than anything else. At the start of the game, charred console, Fury को एक मिशन पर भेजते हैं to defeat and recapture the 7 deadly sins, who are now unleashed upon Earth. And that's the plot. No, honestly, that's the plot of the game. Of course, game में कुछ twists and turns हैं, but that is the overall basic premise of the game. Darksiders 3 एक coming of age story है for our main character, जिसमें Fury both physically and mentally in 7 deadly sins को face करती है, understanding her past mistakes and overcoming her negative side. And by the end of the game, she becomes a better person and the most fleshed out character out of all 4 horsemen. This is a story structure old as time, but I don't think it matters if the lead character is good. And Fury genuinely एक well-written character है, who becomes much more likable and charming by the end of the game. Darksiders 3 इस coming of age story को काफी अच्छे से execute करता है because we can see all the growth moments for Fury, and it was very enduring. But of course, despite being more of a personal story, Darksiders 3 series की overall lore and overarching narrative में काफी अच्छे से fit होता है because of some plot lines, जो future games most likely use करने वाले हैं to conclude the story of these games. Also, Darksiders 3 feels like a direct sequel to Darksiders 1 because game में ऐसी बहुत सारी things हैं जो very Darksiders 1 coded हैं. Like the overall setting of the game being Earth, Fury having a watcher to look over her, returning characters from the first game, and most importantly, using the same 3-sword puzzle as the first game and then making a meta joke about the rule of 3 while using the rule of 3. I fucking despise these kind of self-aware jokes. Even the art direction leans more towards the stylized realism of the first game, which is not as unique looking as Darksiders 2, but it does have its own style that looks good. Gameplay-wise, Darksiders 3 is a Souls-like, but not really. Game में basic Souls-inspired mechanics हैं, like limited healing similar to Estus Flask. There are limited consumables. Players lose souls after death, which can be regained. Combat more slow, methodical, and difficult है, with a focus on iframes and perfect dodges, respawning enemies, and एक upgrade system जो काफी similarly work करता है to Souls games. I think these are enough similarities to consider Darksiders 3 a Souls-like, but I think the basic combat loop leans towards more of a hack and slash game than a Souls-like, जहाँ players के पास multiple combos, special attacks, different weapons, devil trigger, and एक perfect dodge है, which is heavy focus of the game. If I really have to compare, I will put Darksiders 3 in the same category as GodOfWar 2018 and Black Myth Wukong. But the other way around, since Darksiders 3 2018 में release हुआ था, same year as GodOfWar, and 5 fucking years before Black Myth Wukong. So fuck you Black Myth fans, Darksiders 3 is the blueprint. In Darksiders 3's case, it takes some mechanics from Souls formula but mixes it up with more hack and slash combat. And it works surprisingly well, if a bit janky at times. I can't compare it to other Darksiders games because of how drastically different it plays, but it's still a fun combat system which lacks depth in terms of combos and aerial combat, but I think it makes up for it in combat feedback and weapon variety, जो so far series में highest है, with 5 distinct weapons and 9 if you have DLCs. Each weapon has a place and purpose, from crowd control, fast attacks, heavy attacks, to elemental damage like fire, ice, force, and thunder. And players can switch between all 5 weapons mid-combat, providing a little bit more flexibility. It will make things a bit more confusing, but personally मैं इन games को Souls adjacent game कहता हूँ, because they do take mechanics from these games but don't try to replicate the gameplay one-to-one and do their own thing. Also, I really wanted to talk about Fury's design because I think it's really great. And I love how every weapon changes her hair color, which makes her really fucking cool. 10 out of 10 Dommy Mommy would let her hit me with that whip of hers whenever, wherever, and however she wants. Other than gameplay mechanics, there is another reason why people compare Darksiders 3 to Souls-like, which is its interconnected world. But I think ये थोड़ा far-fetched है because it's much more Metroidvania than Dark Souls. Though जिस तरह से world connect होता है, it does remind of Dark Souls, but Dark Souls wishes it could have this kind of interconnectivity. Because of its Metroidvania design, Darksiders 3 अपने world को एक much more believable and better way में connect कर पाता है, in which throughout the game players को new weapons के साथ new traversal and elemental abilities मिलती है, like double jump with fire, gliding with thunder, wall jumping with ice, and object manipulation with gravity. Thanks to all of these abilities, developers इस entire world को एक साथ connect कर पाए from the starting point to the end. And if players want, वो इन locations में backtrack कर सकते हैं without the use of fast travel. I was awestruck while playing Darksiders 3 because people simply don't talk about its interconnectivity, which is one of the most standout things in the game. And it pulls it off better than something like Dark Souls, जिसे the entire gaming and Souls community praise करती है for its interconnectivity, even though it was basically missing for a good chunk of the game. But other than just full world interconnectivity, Darksiders 3's connection को much more meaningful बनाता है with the use of secret passages and locations, जो players certain abilities unlock करने के बाद ही use कर सकते हैं, and it makes the exploration satisfying because some of these passages are much more than rooms filled with loot. They open up to be something more like a corridor जो किसी other location से जाकर connect होता है, और एक small chunk of level filled with loot and secrets. Exploration Darksiders 3 की genuinely one of the best things में से एक है because ये players को continuously surprise and appropriately reward करता है with a good platforming challenge and good loot. One of the things जो players के लिए Souls games को satisfying बनाती है वो है boss fights. And Darksiders 3 does a good job at replicating those more grounded boss fights of this subgenre. Most of the bosses proper 1v1 confrontation है जिनमें players को bosses के pattern learn करने होते हैं to beat them. But just like most Souls games, it all comes down to iframes and punishment. Game में कुछ standout bosses हैं like Lust and Pride, but all of them are very much beatable in few try, especially on lower difficulties. And other than just difficulty option, Gunfire Games ने post-launch player feedback के according game में एक new mode implement किया था, called Classic, जो game को mechanically even more hack and slash gameplay की तरफ push करता है with animation cancelling, no healing animation and other tweaks like it, जो combat को more fast paced बनाते हैं, making it more in line with previous games. But still मैं first time players को game default setting पे play करने का recommend करूँगा because that is simply the intended way to play the game. Darksiders 3 also got 2 DLCs, Keepers of the Void and the Crucible. Keepers of the Void basically एक big dungeon है filled with puzzles, platforming and combat challenges. Players को 4 elementals का use कर 4 levels complete करने होते हैं, with each of them ending with a boss fight. And all 4 bosses player को elemental weapons का एक alternative variant देते हैं with different moveset, जो in my opinion better है compared to their base game version. Just like Darksiders 2, The Crucible एक horde mode है जिसमें players को many enemy waves को हराना होता है, जिसके end में they get rewarded with more loot. Both DLCs are just fine and The Crucible को base game का एक part होना चाहिए था similar to Darksiders 2. Because as a DLC, I don't think it's worth much. At least the new weapon types are good because वो gameplay को simply much more fun बनाते हैं compared to their base counterparts. And this was Darksiders 3. A completely new direction for the series made by a completely new studio. जो for the majority of the fans at release एक divisive entry थी, but after fixes and post-launch content, I believe in its current state, Darksiders 3 एक much more favorable game है that stands shoulder to shoulder with other games in the series. With its unique gameplay, most in-depth protagonists in the series, and a completely interconnected world, which as far as I remember, still needs to be topped by any other game. It has its problems and shortcomings, but Darksiders 3 is still a great game है that tried doing something new with the Souls-like genre and created a new gameplay style that is now more popular thanks to games like Black Myth Wukong. And for that, Darksiders 3 does deserve some respect, even though the reception at the launch was a bit mixed. Darksiders 3 is a game that I can easily recommend to Souls-like and hack and slash fans because it's simply a great game and you won't be disappointed after playing it. 3 down, 1 more to go. The final Darksiders game जो series को एक even more unexpected direction में लेकर जाता है, but that's a story for another video. For now, thanks for watching the video and I'll see you guys next time. See ya!